She betrayed me at the altar, but I came back stronger than ever. It was the kind of day people spend years dreaming about. A sprawling estate nestled in the hills, sunlight pouring in through antique stained glass windows, and rows of polished chairs lined with silk ribbons. The scent of orchids and expensive cologne floated on the breeze. To everyone watching, it was the beginning of a fairy tale. To me, it was the end of everything. I stood at the altar, sweat prickling beneath the collar of my tailored tuxedo. My hands were steady, but my chest thudded like a war drum. Sienna was walking down the aisle, radiant in a white lace gown that clung to her like it was made just for her. She smiled at the crowd and my parents at the flashing cameras. But when her eyes met mine, something flickered, something cold. She took her place across from me, her hand sliding into mine. For a moment, time stood still. Then she leaned in, lips barely moving, and whispered the sentence that would splinter my world. Pay me $7,490 a month, or I marry your rich brother. My first instinct was to laugh. It sounded like a joke, a twisted, ill-timed prank before we said our vows. But when I pulled back to look at her, there was no mischief in her expression, no nerves, no remorse, just icy calculation. My mouth went dry. My brain tried to make sense of the number, $7 for 90. Not a round figure, not a symbolic one. It was precise, intentional, like she'd run the numbers. Budgeted her betrayal. You're not serious, I murmured, the officiant still waiting to begin, oblivious to the ticking bomb between us. I've never been more serious, she said, smiling for the crowd. Behind her, my brother Lucas stood with his hands in his pockets, smirking faintly. He looked good. He always did. Rich, charismatic, effortlessly likable. My polar opposite in every way. And now, apparently, my backup. I wanted to run, to scream, to grab her by the shoulders and shake the truth out of her. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, because somewhere deep inside, I already knew this wasn't new. This had been building for months, years, maybe, and I had been too in love or too blind to see it. So I did the only thing I could. I said one word that cracked her mask and changed everything. No, she blinked, just once, then turned her head, smiled sweetly, and said to my brother, loud enough for every guest to hear, Lucas, I think I made a mistake. I should be marrying you. Gasps rippled through the room like thunder. And as Lucas stepped forward without a flicker of hesitation, as my parents nodded instead of protesting, as the crowd stared in shock, I realized something. I had just been used. But I would not be destroyed. I didn't speak. Not when Lucas took her hand like they'd practiced this moment in secret. Not when my mother brought a shaky hand to her chest, not out of horror, but joy. Not even when Sienna turned to the crowd and gave a soft, trembling laugh like some rom-com heroine realizing her true love had been in front of her all along. The room erupted, half in stunned silence, half in whispers like wildfire. And I stood there, alone, a groom without a bride, a man without a family. The officiant looked at me, helpless. He opened his mouth to say something, but I beat him to it. I took a step back, then another. I didn't turn around yet. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. No. If they wanted a performance, they could have Lucas and Sienna. I turned only when I reached the marble steps at the end of the altar, and as I walked down them, my footsteps echoing like gunshots in the cavernous silence, I didn't glance back. Not once. I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the estate and stepped outside. The sun hit my face like a slap. The world was still turning. The wind still whispered through the trees. Birds chirped overhead as if they hadn't just witnessed the most humiliating moment of my life. I kept walking, ignoring the security guard who looked unsure of whether they should stop me or salute me. I didn't slow down until I was at the edge of the estate's sprawling lawn. I breathed, in and out, trying to process. But there was no sense to be made of it. I had just been blackmailed at the altar by the woman I loved, and betrayed by the brother I had spent my entire life defending. Lucas had always been the favorite, the golden child, the one who never tried, but always won. And now he'd won again. But not because he deserved it, because they let him, because they never really believed in me. I pulled off my tuxedo jacket and flung it over my shoulder. My tie came next, loosened and stuffed into my pocket. It was suffocating, all of it, the weight of expectation, of humiliation, of pretending to be okay. I made it to the gate at the edge of the property and stepped onto the sidewalk. There was no plan, no destination, just motion. My phone vibrated in my pocket, buzzing like a mosquito I didn't care to swat. I already knew who it was. Sienna. The audacity. I ignored it. She could keep calling. She could text a novel. I didn't want her words. I didn't want her explanations. I wanted one thing only: distance. I kept walking, past the rows of parked luxury cars, past the gawking guests smoking on the patio, their expensive cocktails frozen mid-sip. I walked until the estate was nothing but a painful memory shrinking in my rear view. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew this. I wasn't the victim of their story anymore. I was about to write my own. The city had never looked so unfamiliar. I walked aimlessly through the streets, past places that once held meaning, where Sienna and I had laughed, kissed, dreamed. Now they just looked like echoes of a life that never truly existed. A couple passed me, holding hands and laughing. I barely registered them, but deep in my chest, something sharp twisted. Not because I wanted Sienna back. That part of me was already starting to die. No, the pain came from something deeper. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. How do you grieve someone who never really existed? Because the Sienna I loved, the woman I was ready to give my whole life to, wasn't the woman I stood across from at the altar. That woman was a stranger in a beautiful dress, with venom on her tongue and betrayal in her smile. I found a park bench near the edge of the city square and collapsed onto it. The ceremony had started less than an hour ago, but it already felt like a different lifetime. I pulled out my phone, not to answer her calls, but to stare at it blankly. 17 missed calls. 3 texts from Sienna. Come back. Please, it's not what you think. I can explain everything. I stared at those messages like they were some ancient language I'd never seen before. Explain what? How she rehearsed my humiliation in advance. How she used my brother's shadow to block out my entire future. I scrolled through my photos, big mistake. The last picture was a selfie from the rehearsal dinner. She was laughing in it, wine glass in hand, leaning into me like we were the only people that mattered. I deleted it, then the one before, and the one before that. Every memory gone in an instant, just like she was. But that was the thing, wasn't it? Sienna hadn't just walked away from me. She had chosen something else, someone else, at the final moment when all the lights were on, when everyone we loved was watching. She hadn't hesitated, not even for a second. My stomach clenched at the thought of Lucas, standing in his polished shoes with that smug, perfectly symmetrical smile. He hadn't looked surprised. He had looked ready. They both had. And what hurt the most, worse than the betrayal, worse than the humiliation, was the terrifying realization. I'd been the only one in that room who didn't see it coming. A breeze rustled the trees above me. The world, for all its chaos, was still quiet here. For the first time all day, I closed my eyes and let the silence settle over me. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something else. Not revenge. Not rage. Clarity. This wasn't rock bottom. This was the start of the rebuild. The moment where everything I thought I lost would be replaced by something I created myself. They had tried to break me. They had underestimated the wrong man. By the time I made it back to my apartment, the sun was low in the sky, casting long orange shadows across the floor like the aftermath of a slow-burning fire. I dropped my phone on the kitchen counter and just stared at it for a moment. The battery was clinging to life, down to a red sliver. Still, the notifications glowed persistently, like ghosts knocking from the other side. Missed calls. Voicemails. Text from Sienna. Even one from my mother. We need to talk. Come home. Home. That word had never sounded more absurd. That wedding was supposed to be my homecoming, the day I finally stopped being the black sheep, the other son. But now I knew better. Still, I tapped Sienna's name, not to respond, not to speak, just to listen. There was a voice message. I hit play. Her voice crackled through the speaker, unsteady but still wrapped in that practiced sweetness. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But it wasn't supposed to happen like that. I panicked. I didn't mean to hurt you, I swear. She paused. I could hear a shaky inhale. Lucas, he said some things before the ceremony. He made me question everything. You have to understand, I was confused. Confused? Confused doesn't lead someone to blackmail their fiancé with his own brother. Just talk to me, okay? Let me explain. Please. I made a mistake. That word again. Mistake. She kept saying it like she had tripped over a rug, not torn a hole through the fabric of my life. I deleted the message. No hesitation this time. But even as I tossed the phone across the couch, part of me couldn't stop wondering. Why now? Why was she suddenly so desperate to talk after the stunt she pulled in front of 200 people? And then it clicked. It wasn't regret. It wasn't guilt. It was damage control. Lucas. Something had happened. Something she didn't see coming. Maybe he walked out. Maybe he backed out of the deal. Maybe he wasn't as committed to the con as she thought. Whatever it was, it had thrown a wrench into her perfect, polished scheme. She had played her hand too early, and now she was trying to claw her way back to me. But that door? It was closed, dead bolted, bricked up, gone. And yet, curiosity is a tricky thing. I grabbed the phone again, not to reply to Sienna. I wasn't that stupid. I opened my texts. The one from my mom sat at the top. We need to talk. Please don't shut us out. I tapped it. My thumbs hovered. And then I typed back one word. Why? Her reply came almost instantly. It wasn't our idea. We thought you knew. The rage came fast and hot, crawling on my throat. You thought I knew she was planning to marry my brother? We thought it was mutual, that you'd stepped aside. I laughed because the audacity was just that surreal. They'd all been in on it, maybe not planning it directly, but they had accepted it, even welcomed it. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Sienna. This was about every backhanded comment, every cold shoulder, every time my achievements were met with lukewarm smiles while Lucas was treated like royalty for simply showing up. They didn't think they were betraying me. They just never thought I was the one they owed loyalty to. I shut my eyes and exhaled slowly. This wasn't grief anymore. This was fuel. Sienna wanted to play games. Lucas wanted to win. My parents wanted their perfect fairy tale ending. Fine. Let them watch what happens when the lesser brother stops playing nice. The next morning, the world was unnervingly quiet. You'd think waking up the day after being publicly humiliated would feel like dragging your body through broken glass. And maybe it did, just not in the way I expected. I wasn't shattered. I wasn't crying. I was cold, focused, wired like someone who'd finally sobered up after years of drinking a lie. I poured myself black coffee and stood by the window as the city stirred awake. Somewhere out there, Sienna was probably scrambling. Lucas was likely smooth-talking his way into or out of something. And my parents, well, they were probably too busy planning damage control to even realize they'd already lost me. And it was then, between sips of bitterness and silence, that it hit me. They didn't just betray me. They erased me. At that wedding, I wasn't the groom. I wasn't the son. I was a stand-in, a placeholder, the warm-up act for the golden boy who'd finally decided to take center stage. And suddenly, I didn't want to run anymore. I wanted them to see me. Really see me. Not the quiet one. Not the good sport. Not the family disappointment playing dress-up in a tux. No. They were going to see the man they underestimated. They were going to see what happened when the shadow stopped chasing the light and started burning in its own fire. My first move? Information. I needed to know everything. How long Sienna and Lucas had been involved. Well, my parents really knew. Who else had been whispering behind my back in the days leading up to the wedding? So I made a call. A friend from college, Eli. Tech-savvy, borderline genius, and the kind of guy who could pull a thread until the whole web unraveled. Yo, he answered groggy. You alive or what? Your wedding blew up the group chat last night. I didn't smile. I need your help. He paused. Go on. I want you to dig into Lucas and Sienna. Phone records, emails, socials. I don't care how deep you have to go. Find me the truth. Another pause. Then a low whistle. Damn, man, this serious? I closed my eyes. She asked me for my salary or she'd marry my brother. Then she did. Okay, give me an hour. I hung up and stared at the wall, at the photo still hanging from the engagement shoot. Me and Sienna beneath cherry blossoms, all smiles and hand-holding and lies. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I opened it without hesitation. There she was. Sienna. No gown, no glam, no smug grin, just a coat thrown over leggings, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses too big for her face. For a moment, she looked like a stranger. For a moment longer, I wished she was. Can we talk? She asked, voice small. I didn't step aside. You lost the right to talk when you turned my wedding into a hostage negotiation. I didn't mean, yes, you did. I cut in. You meant every word. You meant every look. You meant to humiliate me, to walk away from me for a better offer. Tears welled up in her eyes. And maybe once I would have softened. Maybe once I would have reached for her hand, begged to understand, clung to the hope that there was some version of this story where I wasn't just a footnote. But I wasn't that man anymore. I leaned against the doorframe. Why are you really here? She pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were swollen, haunted. Lucas is gone, she whispered. He disappeared. After the ceremony, he never signed a marriage license. He won't return my calls. I think he used me. I blinked slowly. Oh, I said tone flat. So you got played, and now you want to crawl back to the guy you thought was safe? She flinched. No, it's not like that. I stepped closer, voice sharp. Yes, it is. And you know what? I'm glad. You deserve it. Tears spilled freely now. Please, she choked out. Just let me explain. I took a long breath. Then, with deliberate calm, I said, here's the truth, Sienna. You didn't break me. You revealed me. And now, I finally know who I am without you. Then I closed the door. Not with anger. With finality. Lucas had vanished. No texts. No calls. Not a single smug, gloating message, which for him was suspicious in itself. He was the type who didn't just win, he rubbed your nose in it. Victory wasn't satisfying unless someone else felt the sting of loss. So the fact that he had ghosted not only me, but Sienna after his grand entrance at the altar, that wasn't just strange, it was calculated. And I needed to know why. While Sienna scrambled to salvage her image and my parents tried to spin the chaos as some unfortunate misunderstanding, I was already in motion. Eli had pulled through. He called me the moment he cracked into Lucas's private phone backup. Check your email, he said, and be ready to have your stomach flipped inside out. I opened the files on my laptop. There was texts, voicemails, photos, timestamps going back months. Lucas and Sienna hadn't just started this behind my back. They had planned it. Or rather, Lucas had. Sienna's earliest messages were hesitant, even guilty. But over time, her tone shifted. She stopped talking about me. She started talking about money, about investments, about power, about finally getting what she deserved. And then, weeks before the wedding, Lucas wrote, after the ceremony, we sign. My name gets you everything. His name gets you nothing. My jaw clenched. It wasn't love. It was leverage. Lucas had played her like he played everyone else, dangling the illusion of safety, of wealth, of status. She fell for it, and now that he'd gotten what he wanted, her name on a few legal papers, access to my financials, and a quiet handshake from our family lawyer. He'd vanished. But there was something else, something that chilled me more than all the lies combined. A second phone number, one not registered to Lucas, but the messages were his. They'll never see it coming, not even her. Make sure the prenup doesn't get signed. I have plans. Once the account transfers, I'll be gone. Gone. Gone where? And then, just 2 days before the wedding. I don't care what she thinks. Once the ink is dry, she's as disposable as he is. I leaned back in my chair, heart hammering. Lucas hadn't just betrayed me. He'd used all of us. Sienna, my parents, even his own image as the perfect son. He'd weaponized it. And now, he was gone with something more valuable than Sienna's ring or my pride. Money. Our parents had always trusted him with investments, family trusts, real estate ventures, retirement accounts. I had no access, never did, but Lucas, he held the keys. And just like that, it clicked. He didn't run because of guilt. He ran because the job was done. He played the long con. He was never in it for the girl or the family. Lucas had been setting fire to everything behind the scenes while we were all too busy admiring his sparkle. I stared at the screen as Eli's last message popped up. One more thing. He booked a flight. Cash. Destination. Unknown. But I tracked the IP he used to send that last message. He's already out of the country. I always believed blood meant something. That no matter how competitive, how frustrating, how toxic it got between Lucas and me, there was still something sacred in the fact that we were brothers. That we shared the same childhood, the same roof, the same Sunday dinners, and scraped knees. But I was wrong. Lucas didn't just betray me. He exterminated whatever meaning family once had between us, and he did it with a smile. After Eli confirmed that Lucas had fled the country, I paid a quiet visit to my parents. They were sitting on the back patio, sipping wine like nothing had happened, like I hadn't been humiliated at the altar. Like the son they now praised had vanished with our family's future stuffed in a sleek, black duffel bag. Where is he? I asked, skipping any pretense. My father didn't look up from his glass. My mother sighed like she was tired of the drama. Lucas will call when he's ready, she said, as if I had asked about a late dinner guest. Call from where? I pressed. Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything. They knew. They knew he was going to leave. They helped him. I looked at them, these people who were supposed to protect me, guide me, love me unconditionally, and all I saw were strangers in expensive clothes. They hadn't just chosen Lucas over me. They had funded his escape. You gave him access to everything, I said. Didn't you? My father finally looked at me, his face blank. Lucas knows how to grow the family assets. You never showed interest. I blinked. Interest? Was that what this came down to? I didn't play their little game. So they handed everything over to the charming sociopath in a suit? He used you, I said. He used all of you. And now he's gone. Do you really not see it? My mother's lips pressed into a line. Lucas will come back. He always does. And then it hit me. They didn't just enable him. They expected this. Lucas was their golden goose, even if that goose had a knife behind his back. They didn't care how many people he stepped on, how many hearts he shattered, or how many lives he ruined. As long as he kept producing, kept winning, they would forgive him. Again and again. Blood means nothing when love is conditional. When loyalty is bought. When silence is paid for. I stood there for a moment longer, watching them sip their wine and pretend like they didn't raise a monster. Then I turned to leave. I'm not coming back here, I said quietly. Not until you stop waiting for him. My father didn't even flinch. My mother looked down at her lap. And that was that. They had made their choice. Now I was going to make mine. Rock bottom doesn't come with warning signs. It doesn't give you a heads up or let you catch your breath. It just drops you. Hard. The weeks after I walked out of that wedding were some of the hardest of my life. I lost more than a bride. I lost my family, my sense of direction, and whatever thin thread of identity I've been clinging to. But sometimes, when everything burns down, all that's left is the clarity you didn't know you needed. I stopped waiting for apologies, stopped hoping for explanations. I didn't want to heal. I wanted to build from scratch for myself. And that's exactly what I did. I cashed out what little savings I had left. Most of it had gone into that doomed wedding, and found a small studio apartment across town. It wasn't much. A creaky floor, a drafty window, a kitchen barely big enough for one. But it was mine. I turned off my phone, cut off the noise, stopped answering messages from old friends who just want to gossip. Let Sienna's dozens of texts rot in my inbox, unread. I didn't want their pity. I didn't need their sympathy. I needed a plan, a future. I started freelancing, small, odd jobs at first. Web design, content writing, anything that paid and didn't involve dealing with people who had witnessed my public crucifixion. Days bled into nights, and I worked like a man possessed. But even in that exhaustion, something sparked. Something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. One night, around 3 a.m., I sat staring at the glow of my laptop. I had just finished another rush project for a corporate client, but my brain wouldn't shut off. I opened a blank document and started writing. Not for money, not for work, just writing about the wedding, the betrayal, the moment Sienna whispered that ultimatum in my ear. I wrote it all, not as a journal, not for therapy, but as a story, a warning, a testament, a flame to light the dark corners of anyone else who had been burned the way I had. And then I hit publish. I uploaded it anonymously to a storytelling blog site. I closed the browser and went to sleep. By morning, it had 1,000 views. By the end of the week, it had 50,000. People were sharing it, quoting it, commenting with their own stories of betrayal, heartbreak, and rebirth. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, people saw me. Not the shadow of Lucas. Not the quiet son. Not the groom who got humiliated. Just me. I started writing more. Not just my story, but others like it. Fictionalized versions. Raw, honest reflections. Stories that dug into the wounds most people were too afraid to admit they carried. I didn't know at the time, but I was building something. Not just a blog. Not just a brand. A fire of my own. And it was only getting started. You'd think after everything, I'd want nothing to do with any of them again. But closure isn't about cutting ties. It's about cutting control. So when I got the message from my cousin Mia inviting me to a charity gala that surprise Lucas and Sienna were hosting, I stared at the screen for a long time. At first, I laughed. Then I got quiet. Then I said, I'm going. Not for them. Not to prove anything. Not for revenge. I just wanted them to see that the man they left behind hadn't disappeared. He had evolved. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted them to squirm. The night of the gala, I arrived alone. No fancy entrance. No designer suit. Just me, in a fitted black tux, a quiet smirk, and a confidence I had earned the hard way. The venue was glitzy, Sienna style, of course. Crystal chandeliers, overpriced floral arches, the kind of place you book when you want people to believe your life is flawless. Lucas was already there, working the room with that politician's grin he'd perfected in college. Sienna stood by the bar, sipping champagne, her smile brittle under the weight of perfection. When she saw me, the glass nearly slipped from her hand. Good. I didn't walk over. I didn't rush to make a scene. I let them come to me. And they did. Lucas was first. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, voice too even. I tilted my head. That's funny. I figured you'd expect it by now. Me showing up where I'm not supposed to be. He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Still holding grudges? No, I replied. Just receipts. He flinched, and I saw the crack in his armor. Then came Sienna. She approached slowly like I might bite. Can we talk? She asked, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I studied her for a long time. Same flawless face. Same carefully chosen words. But the shine had dulled. The sparkle in her eyes had faded into something tired, and I realized I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel longing. I felt nothing. We already did, I said calmly. At the altar, she looked like I had slapped her. I made a mistake, she whispered. Yeah, I nodded. You did. She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. You don't get to rewrite the ending, I said. You burned the book. And then I walked away. But I didn't leave the gala. I stayed. I laughed with new people. I told stories. I took pictures. Because I had a right to take up space, too. That night, I didn't get revenge. I got vindication. And sometimes, that's even better. A year had passed. 1 year since I was humiliated at the altar. 1 year since the woman I was ready to marry whispered poison in my ear. 1 year since my own brother stepped into my place like he was doing me a favor. But today, none of that mattered. Because I had moved on. Not in the way people say when they're still carrying pieces of their past in their pockets. No, I healed one painful inch at a time. And somehow, in the ruins they left behind, I built something better than I ever imagined. A business I started from nothing now flourished. What began as a side hustle born from heartbreak turned into a full-time brand, one that represented resilience, honesty, and integrity. Things they couldn't fake, no matter how expensive the suit or how polished the Instagram posts. I had made a name for myself. Not Lucas's shadow, not Sienna's safe choice. Just me. And love? It found me when I stopped looking. Her name was Alara, a quiet kind of brilliant. The type of woman who didn't just enter a room, she anchored it. She didn't need fireworks to make a moment feel magical. With her, even silence felt like music. She knew about my past, every gritty detail, and never flinched. You were always more than enough, she said once, brushing a hand over the scar I didn't even realize I still carried. More than enough. Not just enough. More. I never imagined I'd say this, but I was grateful. Grateful to Sienna for revealing who she was before I signed my life away. Grateful to Lucas for reminding me what betrayal looked like, so I could recognize its opposite. Grateful to my parents for showing me what not to be, so I could become something better. And as I stood on a quiet cliffside, overlooking the waves with Alara's hand in mine, I knew this was the life I was always meant to live. Not polished, not planned, not perfect, but real, raw, and earned. I took one last look at the ring I had once bought for Sienna. It had been tucked away in a drawer all this time, a reminder of what almost was. Now, I held it over the edge of the cliff. Then I let it go. It sank into the ocean like all the doubt, pain, and betrayal that had once anchored me. Gone. And I felt lighter. Alara leaned her head against my shoulder. No regrets? She asked. I smiled. Only that I didn't let go sooner. And together, we walked away toward a future I had built not in spite of what they did, but because I finally knew what I deserved.